everybody. Today, we are going to dip our toe into the depths of Sarkicism. 90% of the stuff that I'm going to be reading to you today will be word for word from the Foundation documents. However, the way these documents are typed seems to be written in a format and for the purpose of teaching Foundation researchers who probably already have a working knowledge of Sarkicism. I'm going to be assuming the whole reason you are here is due to the fact that you have no clue and would love to know what it is. So I will do my best to explain all that I can see within these papers, but I did reorganize some of the writings. Yes, certain things are word for word, but I literally took certain parts and moved them from one spot to a different spot, and then I went over and I realized some of the stuff that they wrote, like they talk about something, right? But then they don't go over it and they don't tell you what led them to that point. So I'm gonna try today, and I'm gonna try and teach you guys like a class teacher. So we'll see how this goes. I would like to mention, before we also get in the middle of this huge classroom teaching thing for today, this is literally a religion where people become flesh monsters, and desire is the measure of all things. So as a result, this is not a very child-friendly religion, especially due to the fact that there are certain spots where we mention a little more spicy things. It's not super bad. Video editing fever dream here. This whole entire video literally took a month and a half to make, just the way that I wanted it, sort of. As a result, actually, there are some parts of this that do get kind of dark. And as a result, viewer discretion is advised. We have mentions of the sexual stuff. We have mentions of the Jewisheid. We have mentions of the murder. So, yeah. So basically, I'm going to read it. And if that's not your jam, that's not your jam. You don't have to watch this. In fact, if you don't, go before you become a flesh monster. Basically, with all of that out of the way, now that you get somewhat of an idea, we must ask ourselves the main question, which is, what is Sarkicism? What is Sarkicism? According to the papers within these egghead documents, Sarkicism is derived from the Greek word meaning flesh. It is a religious/philosophical system that accompanies a variety of traditions, beliefs, and spiritual practices, largely based on the Grand Karsis Ion, their divine founder. You can separate Sarkicism into two main groups, Proto and Neo, but we shall be getting more into detail about them later. I will do a little bit of a compare-contrast, but that's let's just go. First, we need to get an understanding of what this religion entails, then go into the more nitty-gritty details. Apotheosis. Apotheosis is the belief that an individual can ascend to godhood, and it appears that Sarkicism regards the Grand Karsis Ion, and to a lesser extent as Kevlar, more on them later, as a being who has undergone apotheosis. For the Proto-Sarkite, apotheosis will be achieved in time and only through Ion. Also, from what I can gather, Proto-Sarkites tend to see him as more of a messianic figure. Unlike Neo-Sarkites, who tend to believe that if one had the ability to usurp the Ion, it is their right, if not their duty, to do so. The path to apotheosis is equal to something called the will to power. So, what is this will to power? Well, the will to power is considered the primary driving force of man. The individual seeks to master all things within its domain, exerting the direction of power or efficacy, while other individuals do the same, often in opposition. Will is to power as form is to matter. In turn, desire is the measure of all things, or for the full quote, desire is the measure of all things. Be unbound from moral tethers. Do as you will to whom you will. At least according to the Neo-Sarkites. Theology. What is this word? Well, theo means God, and phagi means to eat. So it is otherwise known as God-eating or the sacramental consumption of a god. Sarkists believe there is many gods in the universe, none of which they worship, and that these entities can be quote-unquote devoured in some fashion. Adherents or followers ultimately believe that this parasitic relationship, whether literal or allegorical, is the primary driving force of their thaumaturgical abilities. Sacrifice. So among proto-Sarkic cults, this appears to manifest as the sacrifice of the self for the benefit of the many. Neo-Sarkic cults believe in the sacrifice of the many for the benefit of the individual. Muscle suffers damage only to heal and become stronger than before. They believe that the same can be said for the mind. Oh, how? Well, through developing toleration against conventionally inconceivable ideas. Duh. In essence, they believe that what doesn't kill them makes them stronger. And the way that they do the weird mind thing is by basically reading the Necronomicon, and as long as they don't lose their mind, they become more powerful. Not legit, but the essence is there. According to Sarkicism, strife is the greatest of all tutors. To shepherd the flesh. Okay, so it is believed that all living things descended from a single progenitor, further explored in the mythology section. Adherents or followers hold that this shared ancestry or old blood is the key to corporeal augmentation or loak. A little bit more of details to the progenitor. There's a theory out there that I think it's called it's not parthenogenesis. I'll put the word up. But the theory out there is that spores hit Earth and that cause the whole entire planet to eventually evolve and grow life. That is a theory, a life theory, but within this document, as you can see, what they believe is not necessarily spores, but the flesh. So that is what the old blood is. Anyways, let's get back into this document. Further suggesting a singular understanding of genetics cloaked beneath layers of mysticism. In more similar terms, to shepherd the flesh usually means to augment their bodies with rituals and the like to become stronger. Sarkites believe it is their right to guide and cultivate organic matter, whether it is their own or others. However, you have to have a certain level of skill to steal genes from other life forms or to create entirely new ones. Fun fact, I did find the Foundation does have records and in fact has an SCP that basically a whole entire civilization, which we'll be getting into further along this video, but the ruins of a civilization made of flesh cities exists within the universe, and in particular in Greece. I'll have the name of the SCP up here. Basically, further along within this document, we are going to be mentioning Ion and the fact that he created a whole entire civilization. There are ruins, which are not the ruins that you and I would normally know, which are made of stone and wood and that sort of thing. They're literally made of flesh, if they are properly preserved, which most of the stuff has not been. Anyways, let us get into Proto versus Neo-Sarkites. Proto-Sarkites. So, Proto-Sarkic cults tend to be found in insular communities throughout Eurasia's most isolated regions. Its followers are generally self-reliant, humble, and apprehensive towards outsiders. Such groups commonly eschew modernity, occasionally displaying acute technophobia, and are bound by superstition and taboo. Desire for wealth and material possessions, along with general selfish behavior, are strongly frowned upon. Like I said earlier, the sacrifice of the self for the benefit of the many. The closest I can get to a visual example, at least in our world, would be Midsummer, in particular the Holga, and their sacrifice of the self for the many. Most Proto-Sarkic sects believe that Ion has achieved, or is in the process of achieving, apotheosis, and upon the completion of his metamorphosis, will destroy this flawed, stillborn universe and remake it into the paradise known as Ekulan, where the many will at long last know salvation and joy beneath rose-colored skies. There are, however, other sects that believe that Ion is dead, having martyred himself to protect humanity from the machinations of the gods. One of the things that I do have to point out, that this is not in the document, but I did find this very interesting. The rose-colored skies that these proto-Sarkites are hoping for seems to be very similar to another, like, multiverse within the Foundation overarching, like, universe stuff. Basically, the whole Foundation universe is made up of several multiverses with countless overarching stories which people have written over the decades. Now, I really don't want to get into a deep dive of this one yet, but I did my best to skim over what I could in regards to when the day breaks. Yes, technically it is a universe, but it goes all the way to the IKEA, which the IKEA is technically a universe in and of itself, so then technically you could think that. But anyways, for those of you who are not aware or not familiar with the when the day breaks, it is first seen within this SCP, as you can see. All of a sudden one day, at least according to this SCP document, this day broke, and the sun and its light was red. Now, even the moonlight, and what makes this really terrifying and really interesting is every single person, or animal, whatever it was, as long as it was a living organic thing and not necessarily a plant, but everything else, exposed to this light, melted into flesh monsters. These flesh monsters, as long as they're animals, they seem to try to behave the way that it normally did in life. But when it comes to humans, they will forcefully shove other people into this red sunlight, and if they can't, they will literally sit at the door and be like, please, you gotta see the sun, it's so beautiful to be outside. And what makes all this interesting is the fact that rose-colored skies are found within the proto-Sarkite cult stuff. We have red-colored skies, actually, within this one universe, and we're getting flesh monsters everywhere. And the flesh monsters do consider when they're outside it being a paradise. Now, technically speaking, when it comes to when the day breaks sort of thing, I tried to, like I said, I tried to skim it. I didn't do super duper deep research. But what I did find that was interesting with all of it was, we have all those things, but then they end up saying, basically, nobody knows why this is the way it is, which, sure, fine, but I do find those two things interesting. I looked through Reddit, I looked through Villain Wiki. I know maybe not the best places to look to try and skim over these type of documents and stuff like that, but from what I could tell, nobody knew where this came from. But I did find it an interesting food for thought. One last thing that I do have to mention about proto-Sarkites before we move on to the Neos is they are the closest followers to the stuff written down by Ion and his Kevlar apostles, basically. And that is going to very differ. For instance, their stuff is, they follow religious stuff. We're going to be going to Neo-Sarkites, and Neo-Sarkites have something that is a little different in their type of culture, which we're going to be getting into right now. So, let's go into Neo-Sarkites. From what I can gather, most Neo-Sarkic cults are usually cosmopolitan, publicly embracing modernity, and showing no apparent qualms with technology. Their public lives differing little from others of their culture and social status. Adherents or followers are primarily affluent families, rich in history and scandal. It is so deeply rooted in the average Neo-Sarkic's life that when the Foundation acquired, this is where we get the difference between Pro and Neo, by the way, and deciphered letters between Neo-Sarkic cult members, they deciphered them, and it revealed a fairly intricate caste system outside of the religious hierarchy, which we'll get into the religious hierarchy stuff later. Their caste functions like a form of pedigree. It appears that Neo-Sarkites place a heavy emphasis on bloodline, a hidden aristocracy whose marriages form pacts, and the foundations of powerful Sarkic families referred to by followers as high bloods, or more in a joking manner, black bloods. One is generally born into Sarkism, with new blood introduced through careful selection. At least this is all according to a doctor who has done a lot of research, and I read a lot of his stuff already, even though you don't realize it. His name is Dr. Lowe. This caste system does not appear to exist among proto-Sarkic cults, like I said earlier. In fact, the idea of a caste system contradicts the utilitarian beliefs common to early Sarkism. Like I said, Protos are closer followers to Ion's teaching than Neos are. Speaking of what the Neos think of Ion's teaching, Neo-Sarkites usually regard Ion with a certain amount of indifference. I'm not saying there aren't any that do sort of view him differently, but let's get back into it. Their only concern is apotheosis, to become like the gods through the acquisition of power, the development of skill, and the severing of ethical tethers that limit the potential of the individual. The Grand Karsus is not viewed as a prophetic figure, but rather as an individual who came the closest to achieving godhood. They dismiss his moral teachings as weakness, ignoring much of the old scripture in favor of the rituals they might exploit. This makes them the more dangerous of the two sects. While the beliefs cause the morality of proto-Sarkites to be extremely different from our own, they still have them. For the Neo-Sarkite, they live by basically, do as you will, do whom you will. I must say, before we move on, I did some skimming over on research into Neo-Sarkic cults. What we just read is a mass generalization. So, some of the differences between a couple of the cults that I did find. I found within the Hunter's Black Lodge, one of their Karsus seems to care deeply about some of his followers, and his followers, in turn, care deeply about him. It is very human, and while I personally want to go after such connections in my life, you would consider such a loyalty a weakness, which was the whole entire point of being a Neo-Sarkite, being powerful. This group is also an underground gang, not necessarily people with a certain pedigree. It also seems that another Neo-Sarkic cult, while it held all of the previous hallmarks that we just read at the beginning part of this, thing for Neo-Sarkites, they seem to do the Ion's bidding. Now, what I mean by that, so when I ended up skimming over, I'm not saying I did a whole entire thing, maybe I'm wrong with what I thought I was doing. I tried to do as fast as I could. They inadvertently summoned Ion. It is called Adytum's Wake. Now, people say, at least what the Neo-Sarkites believed, that they were doing was they were summoning Ion. However, I highly suspect that is not the case. How is that the case? Well, let's get into it. When you look within the footnotes, it says Dr. Lowe doesn't believe that this is the actual Ion, and this guy's literally been researching this crap and probably made this whole entire document. And if he highly suggests that this isn't the actual Ion, I will assume that he's probably right. But it does seem kind of interesting. Another detail that I did notice when it came to Ion is when you go through the document and you try and save the picture for this quote-unquote Ion, it'll say pseudo-Ion in the file. So I just find that rather interesting. Our Sarkites are the last on our list of things. Yes, we went back and forth between Proto and Neo, but supposedly, when it comes to Proto-Sarkites, yes, they are the closest known to following Ion and his teachings and all that good shiz, but technically speaking, they don't follow it to the letter. They have their own traditions, their own beliefs that they have made over the past several millennia, because this thing's at least 3,000 years old. And because of that, they don't follow it to the letter. The Foundation has theorized, supposedly, that a Sarkite called Sarkites would be the closest, literally following all of the teachings of Ion and all that other good shiz. But the Foundation cannot confirm. So, in conclusion, between Proto and Neo-Sarkites, while Neo-Sarkites and Proto-Sarkites share a common mythology and many of the same practices, it may be best to see them as distinct religions. To Proto-Sarkites, Neo-Sarkites are heretical, if not utterly profane. This renders Neo-Sarkites especially dangerous, as they lack the ethical and moral restraints common among the older traditions, as I've already said. There is evidence that Neo-Sarkites have gone as far as to make pacts with otherworldly beings called Archerions that Ion once preached against. I will be talking about them later. Now that we have a basic understanding of both religions and what all of their stuff entails, let's get into more of the nuances of this faith system, whatever you want to call it. So, first of all, they are highly secretive. The general public appears to have little to no direct knowledge of their existence. However, some organizations are aware of them, such as the Global Occult Coalition, otherwise known as the GOC, the Horizon Initiative, the Foundation, obviously, and last but not least, the Church of the Broken God. Both Sarkites and the Church of the Broken God seem to have a long-standing feud, which, according to some documents, which I will be going into later, may have started since the creation of humanity itself. While I am unaware of the exact details, supposedly the first to pick up the knowledge of Sarkites and words associated with them are the GOC. The Foundation picked up the words from them, but it turns out that that may not have been a good thing, due to the fact that Sarkite, Sarkic, whatever you could say, has bad connotations due to the fact that the Mechanites, who are the ancestors to the Church of the Broken God, used such words to describe Sarkites, i.e. if the Foundation ever wants to become part of a church that involves the flesh gods, they cannot say Sarkite, they must say Nalka, because that is what Sarkism actually is according to Sarkites. Nalka. Like I said, this religion has been around for a very long time, so guess what? They have their own language. It is called Adytite. Supposedly, it is a combination of, let me see here, Proto-Uralic, Indo-European, possibly Daevite, more on them later, and look at this, all right? How am I supposed to read this? Okay? How? At least there's a footnote, and it basically says that whatever this word is translates to chaos tongue. Anyways, supposedly, it is a primary Uralic sort of language, and while this document shows the basics on how to understand this language, I have flunked out of Spanish once before, so this is way too much for me to read, and just looking at these papers gives me a headache, so I will link how to read Flesh Monster in the description below, but you're not getting that today. Disease is often viewed with reverence, and Sarkic shrines have been discovered with offerings of swollen lymph nodes and tumorous growths. Certain Sarkic cults treat contagions as consecration, a means to quote-unquote cull the weak and purify the masses, and thus actively seek to ensure their spread. Most, but not all Sarkites display an inherent resistance to pathogens, though it remains unknown if this is an anomalous or naturally occurring tribute. So I've had to redo this part multiple times, but hopefully it will all be worth it. So as far as I know, in regards to scriptures that are for Sarkism, Nalka, whatever, there are at least 2, maybe 3 books that hold within them the history of Sarkism, of Ion and his Kevlar, of his teachings, of them writing to one another love letters, other random things about how life is being and everything like that. They are called 1. the Bofidel Codex, 2. the Valkysaron, and 3. Eliuvanculus. From what I know, the Bofidel Codex has been found by the Foundation. Bits and pieces of the Valkysaron were found in Adytum's wake, specifically in their Holy Bible. For some reason, I think they made their own Bible with Adytum's wake. But, El Kuvalankalas is a grimoire that the Foundation is aware of. It supposedly has a lot of information about everything, but it has not been discovered. So those are the 3 things that I know about. Let's move on. Augmentation. Sarkic anomalies are not without risk to their users. while Sarkites are able to augment themselves into physically superior forms, it has been shown that such alterations, or perhaps the secret truths that they come to learn along their way to apotheosis, have a degenerative influence on mental stability. The exact cause of this remains unexplained, but it is most exemplified among known Karcists, who frequently display symptoms of psychosis. It is difficult to draw a line between cult and family in Sarkism. The recruitment of outsiders is usually unnecessary, as Sarkites have little trouble maintaining their numbers. Their virility and health apparently unaffected by generations of inbreeding. Even among non-Karcists, Karcists and above being biologically immortal, Sarkites have a significantly lower rates of mortality when compared to that of an average human, rarely dying before reaching 100. According to Dr. Lowe, once again, he says, and I quote, "Indeed, a Sarkic community was once discovered by studying late medieval census data and searching for populations with unusually low mortality rates, most especially those whose numbers were unaffected by pandemics such as the Black Death. The only reason one may die before their century is up is by violence or accident. If one lives that long, it is obviously not going to go unnoticed, unless you do some good bit of hiding. So, according to some Foundation theories, it is possible that upon reaching a certain age, Neo-Sarkites falsify their deaths and spend the rest of their anomalously extended lives away from public view." Second to last, cosmology. They believe that the observable universe is one of a finite or infinite number of possible universes contained within the metaverse. Each universe can in turn be divided into a finite or infinite number of iterations. The natural laws which allow the manifestation of universes is eternal, without being or end. Universes, on the other hand, are created and eventually destroyed. Beyond this, Sarkic cosmology is fairly simple by virtue of the indifference of its adherents, followers. Existence is regarded as an entirely brute fact, corruptible, discordant, and devoid of purpose. So, last but not least, one thing that I really wanted to at least show, because I think some people have it within their stories and within their tales, is the meaning for the Ion's original name, which let's get into it right now. The closest approximation that we can get to his name is Proto-Jensen Ziyan, meaning breaker of ropes, and by extension, destroyer of bondage. Ziyan was borrowed into Old Adytite as Ijan or John, which for some of you who have listened to some of the stuff that I have read, you may have actually heard Ijan or John before, so just kind of an interesting thing. Ultimately, it is feared that the Foundation and GOC only know a fraction of what Sarkism entails and what its followers intend. Based on available information, the speculated goals of Sarkic cults nevertheless represent a SK-class dominance shift, including the possibility of an SK-class end-of-the-world scenario. And as a semi-corporeal entity with a library card and countless universes to collect documents, including of the corpses, not to mention having the ability to search Foundation database whenever I wish. Yes, my lovely Foundation researchers, if this is what you have, you know nothing, even with the few things that I have gleaned. Although I do appreciate reading your documents to teach random people about this religion. So, anyway, in the spirit of me reading the overview, which, by the way, I grabbed the overview, I tied a whole bunch of fun stuff together, but, this is a random picture that I found within the overview. This is our little tiny bit of a break before we go back into the deep, heavy shiz. It just looks rather interesting, don't you say? So, it says here that a seal discovered among the pages of a Sarkic grimoire, can only assume that it might be the Valkyzeron, but who knows, of singular significance. Variations of the seal and its individual symbols have been found at Sarkic sites around the world. There's a whole world of SCPs and tales that I could literally read to you, but hell no. This is the list, alright? Thousands upon thousands of SCPs and thousands upon thousands of tales. So we're not going to be reading that. While I was doing all of the research for this, I ended up finding out that whoever was writing it was actually writing it as I was researching. So there were certain parts that weren't there for the first half of my research that ended up happening to be there in the second half of my research. Though the common Sarkic hierarchy has remained relatively unchanged over the last 3,000 years, it is no way universal. The two highest tiers, Azimok, or Grand Karcist, and Kevlar, High Karcist, have not been verified outside of scripture and other documents, i.e. what they're saying is, if you're ever going to meet a cult, most likely you're not going to actually meet the Azimok and the Kevlar, you're going to meet the other ones. It is difficult to discern whether these ranks are truly part of modern Sarkic hierarchy, like I said, or serve as a mythical foundation. Haha. With that said, the standard hierarchy from highest to lowest in terms of authority consists of Azimok, also known as the Grand Karcist, or, by the way, Sorcerer of Adytum, that's his other name, the highest tier reserved for the Prophet of Ion and no other. However, it is believed that there have been pretenders claiming to be the second coming of Ion. Like I said, we have the lovely pretender, supposedly, from Adytum's wake, which, by the way, if you are curious to see what his name is, at least according to the Foundation, it is KTE 0452 Black. However, like I said, Dr. Lowe, who I keep running into. By the way, also, little tangent, this is her profile. Anyways, let's get back into this. She, like I said, doesn't suspect that this is the Ion, and like I said, if she thinks that it's not Ion, it ain't Ion. Kevlar. The names of 4 Kevlar are presently known, and they appear to have served a role similar to apostles. Their names include Kevlar Nadex, Kevlar Lovtar, Kevlar Oruk, and Kevlar Sarin. It is common for Neo-Sarkites to claim ancestry from a Kevlar, despite evidence against that possibility. See the Hyogiphagy subsection, which we are going to be reading, of history for the information about individual Kevlar. If you are interested, I did actually find 2 profiles on 2 of the Kevlar. Here they are. Kind of interesting. Now, one of them that does not have a, what shall we say? He doesn't have a profile, but I must mention this because it's kind of cool. There is, again, one Neo-Sarkic cult that is tied to a Kevlar, in particular, Kevlar Oruk. Now, what's up with Oruk? Well, some spoilers. He is known as a Cyclopean. He is this big, muscly dude. I guess you could say that was in the arenas. So, guess who has ties to them? Hunter's Black Lodge. So, if you can see right here, we have the symbol of the Hunter's Black Lodge. This is part of the picture that I have posted earlier throughout this video. From what I can assume, this is Oruk, so we got 2 Cyclopeans. Kind of cool. Now that we have an idea on the Kevlar and Azimok, let's move on to the actual, real life, if you're going to meet them, leaders, which are the Karcists. The spiritual and secular leaders among Sarkic organizations, Karcists are considered biologically immortal and vary in form and anomalous ability. So, what does it mean by vary in form? Well, as a religious leader, you are expected to be the best example that your religion has to offer, right? Well, the whole entire point of this religion is to what? Become super powerful, possibly become a god, and along with it shepherd the flesh. Well, because these entities are literally biologically immortal and are the most powerful and the best that their cult has to offer, that means that they most likely will not have a human form as we would see it. Another thing that I must mention when it comes to Karsus, they control something, which most adherents, which by the way, adherents means followers, would have. Now, like we said earlier, when it comes to followers of this religion, it takes a certain amount of skill to do, shall we say, moving genetics from one person to another, possibly creating new beings. Haklost are in particular flesh monsters. Now, Karsus have the ability to create Haklost. They are known to use them. Now, here's the thing when it comes to Haklost. Haklost could be made from just random flesh, or they could literally use a living being, which maybe they use living beings like animals or something like that, but another terrifying one that they could possibly use are people. Yes, my lovelies, they can actually turn, if they're super powerful, people into Haklost. They may have the abilities to actually control a human mind, at least to a certain extent, and if they're super powerful, transform them entirely into a different being and do whatever the heck they want with it. Now, don't believe me? Let's get into it. Memetics. So, for the majority of people who are out there, they're probably listening to this, when you usually think about a meme, you usually probably think about something that is really funny, like a picture or a sound or something. People love it so much for some reason that they will use it in their everyday life to express feelings, emotions, random funny moments in their life. It's something that's meant to be shared, which is why I think we have this being called memetics. What are memetics within the SCP universe? Well, memetics are not necessarily super crazy magic shit. It usually has something to do with the biologicalness of people. When it comes to people, we are biomechanical creatures. And because we are biomechanical creatures, we have glitches in the system. Now, the whole entire point of a meme, I guess you could say, is it literally causes your brain to glitch out and do something. So, what's that something? Well, it depends. We do have some flowers, actually, that are in the foundation. And these tulips cause people to want to grow them. And nothing but tulips, which, I mean, it's fine to grow a certain type of plant if that's something that you love to do. However, this tulip literally causes everybody and anybody. So if everybody was growing nothing but tulips and was obsessing over these tulips, then pretty soon humanity would starve and the whole entire government agencies and everything, the way that our society runs, would no longer run and would no longer work because we would be doing nothing but tulips. And if you don't do that, no food, no being able to survive, a whole entire thing, tulips would take over the world. As a result, the Foundation obviously doesn't want that to happen. There are also, believe it or not, memetic hazards that don't want to be spread, which are called anti-memes. Anti-memes can take a variety of different forms, whether it be taboo subjects, people going over and being like, I tried to do math problem and I can't do math problem. Some of the more anomalous ones could literally be ideas. They could take on the form of actual people. They can be literal creatures that, regardless if you look at it or not, you literally cannot perceive it. A good description of these would be those creepy monsters within the Doctor Who, where you can look at them, you can talk to them, you can interact with them, but as soon as you look away, you're like, what are you talking about? I wasn't talking to something. It's something that literally tries to use your brain against you to make you forget about what it is. So that is what an anti-meme is. Some examples of an anti-meme would be SCP-055. There's a story that I read recently, which is Unforgettable, That's What You Are, where we have this giant behemoth monster that as soon as somebody knows what it is, it knows what you are, and it's going to eat your face! And some of the anti-memes out there are so dangerous and so spooky scary, right? They can literally kill people in front of you. You won't remember who the person was. They won't have existed. They could have been in your whole entire life for the longest time, and nobody will have remembered it, not even you. You could literally be part of the family, and you wouldn't know. How does this all figure in with the Sarkic stuff? When I can see some Sarkic cults have the ability to prevent people from being able to perceive them, my best guess is that they are biologically able to keep them from doing that, and if that's the case, then they are doing anti-memetic type of stuff, which is pretty cool. Now, a great example of this would literally be within Adytum's Wake. What all happened there? Well, first of all, what ended up happening with Adytum's Wake is a couple members of the GOC ended up getting some weird reports of a city, so they're like, let's go check that out. So they ended up sending a team to check it out, and they never came back. Something about this just seemed off. And while the Foundation and the GOC aren't like partners don't really work together, the GOC knows that the Foundation can contain things that is well above the GOC's pay grade. So they go to the Foundation, they're like, hey, yo, I got some weird stuff going in this city. All of my people that I sent in are gone. I have no idea where they went. And we really want to know what's going on. So can you guys send some people over? So the Foundation was like, I got you. So they get a group of people and they send them in, and only one member comes out. Now, what exactly happened? Well, as far as I can skim, okay, this guy went in and his team members were picked off one by one, and by the time they figured out something was wrong, they were gone, they were dead, and he ran out, he got some drugs, he came back in, and those drugs were able to help him perceive what was around him. And it turns out that Adytum's Wake, whenever somebody was trying to do research or figure stuff out, were killing off those people. And with all this information, all that knowledge, the Foundation and the GOC went out of their way and they cracked down, they took everything down, and Adytum's Wake is no longer a issue, at least as far as they know. For the time being, there could be more stories further along the line that will be written about them, but in essence, altogether, they were able to control people's minds enough to be able to prevent them from perceiving all the crazy, like, ritualistic crap that they were doing. And as a result of that, Foundation got really lucky. So, in essence, when it comes to Karsis and this type of stuff, this whole entire religion can be absolutely terrifying, because there could be people out there doing horrible things to your family members, and you would have no idea. Hell, you might even forget about them. You don't know. But let's move on to the second people who would be in power, which are the Voltar. So, Voltar are advisors to a Karsist, predominantly found among proto-Sarkic cults, where it is synonymous with quote-unquote wise one. While they aren't the leader within the cult, they do hold some sway, and as such, they are very well respected. One thing that I must mention when it comes to Voltar, just because you have met a Voltar within the community, you have not met all of the Voltar. So, in essence, there could be more than one. Like what ended up happening in Hunter's Black Lodge, there were a group of Voltar. Now we're going to be moving on to two other tiers. These ones were added after all of my research had been completed. So we have a Zend, a middle rank of the Sarkic hierarchy, having a degree of power and protection, unlike the Orin, which we'll be going into them later. This rank, however, is not recognized by most proto-Sarkites. So Zend will most likely be found within the Neo-Sarkic sects. Orin. the lowest rank of the Sarkic hierarchy. Adherents who do not descend from a Sarkic bloodline begin at this level. Much like Zend, Proto-Sarkites do not typically recognize this rank, as most Proto-Sarkic cults are extremely insular and rarely embrace outsiders. While conversion is also uncommon among Neo-Sarkites, they are still known to employ covert proto-cilium. The old god, Yaldabaoth, God-Eater, devour his or her undulating vastness, the great winnower, the womb of chaos, and other various epithets that you will find within countless documents. This creature is regarded in Sarkism as the principal power in the universe. Neo-Sarkites appear to admire this entity, but Proto-Sarkites, and all scripture discovered thus far, describes it as the true enemy of all people. Translated fragments of the Velkizaron suggest that Ion had somehow usurped control of this cosmic entity, weaving the flesh of the old god as a sort of armor, and crafting from its body a kingdom. This is contradicted by recently discovered scripture that suggested that Ion merely cast down the quote-unquote living gods of the Deva, weaker avatars of the Archerians. By the way, something that I must mention about the Deva, the children/servants of Yaldabaoth. They are an ancient race that supposedly within the Foundation's universe, their old Foundation universe, did some pretty not so good things that we will be mentioning further on when it comes to the history. They play a huge role when it comes to the origin story of Ion and his Kevlar, and a little bit of an explained. So this is what some of them look like. Supposedly they vary with appearance, but they can live for hundreds of years. They are very much into the magical side of things, and then it's obviously because they're tied with Yaldabaoth. Now, Ion got his power from Yaldabaoth, and, well, the Deva got their power from Yaldabaoth as well, so it stands to say they would be very similar with their abilities and what they use to create certain things. The thing that I must mention when it comes to Deva, the word Deva technically is tied to actually Indian religions, in particular Hindu, and when it comes to Deva actually is the standing alone word for God. You can have a house Deva, you can have a river Deva, you can have a sky Deva. Deva means God. Now, usually Deva in the Hindu context is very chill. Usually they are referred to gods that are good. They, in fact, if the entity isn't good, they are referred to as a different thing, which is basically a demon in our English understanding of things. So Deva usually, in real life, is referred to as a nice thing, like a nice god, a nice, powerful, immortal being. Deva, however, what have we said before when it comes to all of the Foundation works? They've literally been written in the past decades. Not only that, but they're also written by volunteer writers who, I mean, let's be real. If you're going to write something, would you want to write something about something you hate? No, probably not. But, well, a whole bunch of people wanting to read and want to write and add to the mythos of something that they enjoy may also enjoy a lovely TV show called Supernatural, where people literally hunt monsters and the paranormal, and within the first season, we are introduced to the Deva, at least within the supernatural universe, which they are very powerful beings that are not good. So I have a feeling what the Deva are actually based off of probably has something to do with the supernatural. Anyways, the continued mortality of humanity and the absence of the paradise ultimately implies that were the Ion real, then he had failed to achieve his goals. As with all things related to Sarkism, it is difficult to discern reality from myth, most especially when myths contradict. Proto-Sarkites view this entity with fear and disgust, regarding it as both the creator and destroyer of all life, and the progenitor of the gods. As more sects are discovered, the diversity of the interpretation grows readily apparent. Here lovely Sown, which is a chapter within a religious text with Sarkicism, and this is what they describe our lovely Yaldabaoth as being. The wound cut from the flesh of totality. Deep, it severed the lines of future and past. Drawn to its ancient fester, gods swarmed like flies as to a corpse. We waited within bloodless veins, faithful to that which we could not know, unable to imagine that we might become their greater. Here we slept until our souls became flesh. Son Alku. So Yaldabaoth is portrayed as both destroyer and incidental creator, feeding upon gods, worlds, and stars, while exhaling life into the cosmos, which will evolve, grow, and eventually be harvested again. Life is thus a natural byproduct of the old god's existence, unguided by intelligence and spread throughout a process not entirely dissimilar from, like I've mentioned before, but I wasn't able to remember the name, pansperma is what it's actually called. Sarkites believe this entity has turned the multiverse into an altar, with our existence and the existence of all biological life forms being brought into reality for a singular purpose of sacrifice. According to the Valkysaron, this is what they say is the symbol of Yaldabaoth. Something important that I must say into regards of Yaldabaoth. Now, this is what the Foundation would believe what Yaldabaoth is, but I may have actually found her physical location within my own research into SCP-049. So, how did I find this exactly? Well, one of SCP-049's rabbit holes leads us to the lovely city known as Alaggada, otherwise known as SCP-2264. Now, for those of you who are unaware of what SCP-2264 is, it is a doorway that people can go within to find a world full of craziness. It basically looks like this one scene from Labyrinth. I will have a little clip right now.
How you turn my world, you precious thing. You starve and near exhaust me. Everything I've done for you. I move as not for no one. You've run so long, you've run so far. No, I can be so cruel. Just as I can be so cruel. Oh, I do believe in you. Joey! Yes, I do. Live without the sunlight. Love without your heartbeat. I can't live within you.
And now that you have an understanding of what it's supposed to look like, let's get into more details about this city. Now, this city supposedly exists not within a... It exists right before dreams become the reality of the world around you. It is not part of our world, but can literally have doorways to other worlds within it that lead from this thing. It's a whole thing. It's really pretty damn cool. Now, one of the things that happens within this city is we have a bunch of gods. We have a bunch of very powerful entities. In particular, one that has been mentioned is the Deathless Merchant of London, which is the Dark within Marshall, Carter, and Dark. We have people who are not people, they're ideas. These ideas literally go there to do deals. We have gods that are literally just chilling there, casually sacrificing babies. And we have a room devoted to sex. And anything that you could possibly think of is in that room. You don't want to know what's in there. It's pretty crazy in that room. So this is what makes this really cool. Okay, I know I'm going on a huge tangent with everything. This is a city that has this as one of the people who ends up seeing it. Do you see this? It's so freaking cool. It means, okay, so the whole entire thing when it came to the foundation, when they visited this city, is the fact that the people that went in there believed that they were not perceiving what was the actual truth. Now, what have we mentioned before, my lovely people? We have a city called Adytum's Wake where the Foundationeers were not able to perceive the city. This city is made of flesh. Now, here's the thing when it comes to the Yaldabaoth and Elgato and everything like that. The whole entire reason why we have a long-standing feud between flesh religion and the Church of the Broken God is because Church of the Broken God is tied to a different god. His name is, get ready for this, Mechane. Now, when it comes to Mechane, he is considered a god who, I'll just leave a clip right here. This is what the main teachings in the Church of the Broken God believe.
From the moment I understood the weakness of my flesh, it disgusted me. I craved the strength and certainty of steel. I aspired to the purity of the blessed machine. Your kind cling to your flesh, as if it will not decay and fail you. One day the crude biomass that you call a temple will wither, and you will beg my kind to save you. But I am already saved. For the machine is immortal.
This is what the main teachings in the Church of the Broken God believe. So, as you can see, when it comes to everything, this god, okay, is more for the intellectually inclined, doesn't necessarily be driven by desires of the flesh, which is what makes everything really cool. I must bring you to a story that I have found, that I have read, that is called The Clock Will Strike Again. So, what is The Clock Will Strike Again story about?
He's just standing there, menacingly!
It is about a story of a guard who is literally witnessing the formation of Alaggada, the whole entire world of Alaggada in particular. Here are some things that I found very interesting that has been written within this story. He is standing there as he is given the mask and marked by the dragon. His king is watching from his forever throne. He has been standing there as he was dying, then dead, as he saw the mark of the dragon, but that was before the king started to shriek. The dragon was laughing in his brass prison, remember this, my lovelies, and he witnessed his mark. But he has been standing there as he saw things he should not, as he faced the blood river and the absence of a god, and looked into the madness of the dragon. So, we have a mention of a dragon, which we are going to be going into very shortly, but we've heard about this weird dragon and the formation of Alaggada itself. Now, when it came to the formation of Alaggada, I have multiple different stories that I have read over the past year. When it comes to the formation of Alaggada itself, there are multiple stories. There are stories of a creature that literally had the ability to talk and go out of their way to change reality itself, which kind of interesting, right? We have another story which I personally believe is the closest to our lovely thing. That is a whole entire different video in and of itself on my explaining on why I believe this one is more legit. But from what I can tell, the original Alaggada city was owned by a king, obviously. The king had a kingdom. This kingdom was, for some reason, used as a bargaining chip with the Brothers' Death for playing a game. Well, this king ends up losing the game. And when he lost the game, the kingdom obviously got pissed. 90% of the population died to famine, plagues, whole bunch of just crazy shit. Okay, and crows are in the background. They are symbol of death, and not only that, but that is how they take their form as crows. So they're watching as the city, all right, where this king was from, ends up turning on the king. Now, why does this kingdom, city, decide to turn on the king? Not only because 90% of the population is there, but the reason why the king first started to bargain with the brother's death is because he was a cultist. Not necessarily Sarkicism, but he was into the occult. He was into researching forbidden spells, forbidden spooky sort of things, and what we have as a reference to another example would be what happened with the Fae and a whole entire city basically being within a factory, and this factory ends up doing some crazy shit. So what ends up happening is this man is very much into the occult. He is very much into summoning things that he maybe should not. He doesn't want to die. And he knows he really, really, royally fucked up in more ways than one. So he goes out of his way, and he wants to keep some of his citizens, shall we say, including our lovely guard. He marks them with a special symbol, makes them wear a certain type of mask. And in the process of doing that, the city goes and they run up, they kill him, they quarter him, and he doesn't die. He still keeps laughing, and he has a very creepy little look on his face, and that is very similar to what ends up happening with the factory. Its whole entire video in and of itself. While he was getting drawn and quartered, it ends up mentioning that he was praying to a god he should not. Now, my lovely listeners, Yaldabaoth was that god. Okay, so why do I think that it was Yaldabaoth? Well, that brings us to another part that I have read, and this part I specifically just want to read it all together because I want all of this to make the most amount of sense. The amount of detail that is within this document makes me want to read it, and you might be wondering, what document am I talking about? Well, I will put the name right here. This is the document that I am talking about, and we're going to be reading certain parts of this because it mentions the dragon, the brass cage, and why I personally think that Yaldabaoth was the god that the hanged king was praying. Sword like serpent. Hypatia, circa 100 BCE, Lesbos. I have picked up a sword by the seashore, who whispered to me soft words. First, it told me about 2 great dragons. Then, it spoke about man and war. One was there to enlighten in the Eden, it said. The other, a reckless god. One taught us to think and feel, it said. The other bred us from soil. The dragons once rested in the abyss, it said. Then came their sons and daughters. One had made a cage of his bronze skeleton. The other trapped and suffered. One wore a crown of thunder and lightning, it said. The other sat on a throne of bones. But the crown is now in pieces, and the throne concealed. Their descendants on earth live oblivious. I shall build him a temple and an altar, I said, so the dragons shall be remembered. I shall light the candles and speak of prayers, I said, and make sacrifice of blood and steel. I have taken his sword back from the seashore, crafted an altar out of iron and silver. I have laid the pillars and paved the floor, lit the candles at nightfall. I have put his sword upon the altar, where it coiled like a serpent. It sang in a language not of this world, then spoke about men and war. It was when the priests lit the fire of bronze, it said, that the beasts of blood had gathered. Great colossi of metal stood with hammers, as horrible angels were called. It was when the sky bled a crimson red, it said, that stars all flickered and trembled. Teeth and thorns clutching together, roars and clanking long heard. There stood the dragon's descendants. Each fought for their only god. Men implanted themselves with inventions of God, men reborn to be dragons and serpents. The one dragon shall cry with his tears of mercury, the other shall laugh as the chains rattle. There stood the dragon's proud descendants, regarding one another as pests and cancer. They bit and cut and summoned the lightnings, until one was torn and the other was lost. They fought on earth as their progenitors did in heaven, in elder times and formless void. The men are not better than their creators, it said, as the dragons no better than us. But broken is broken, and lost is lost, it said. But I am a mere sword, a sword forged by his sacred fires, it said, sharpened to impale the heart of another. But as such a weapon I was never used, it said, now lay rusted and shameful. I have seen the great dragon in the great brass cage, Sarki circa 900 CE, Tibetan plateau. Upon the mountains came a man. His lips were sealed, but his eyes are many. In his company were beasts and serpents, chained to his many hands, reluctantly following. I came in front of him in fear and worship, listening to the prophecy from the tongueless prophet. The serpents coiled and the beasts restless, but each held back by the eyes ever watching. I have seen the dragon in the great brass cage, he said. Its claws are sharp and its breeds are many, its mouth consuming stars and its scales large as cities. It coils and bends with the cage rusting. I have heard chanting and seen his servants, reborn from mere men to serpents and beasts. Sacrifices were made in exchange for power, but the great dragon never needs to feed. It fed on the bodies of gods, not the flesh of men. It fell into a slumber for ages and ages, but its glory reduces not, his crown ever flaming. Only a fool would claim mastery to such a thing. Pity the great sorcerer, king of Adytum, who regards himself a god, but an insect merely. Pity his Kevlar and proud Karsists, who seek to rule the land, but will all perish. Pity the followers of the great brass machine, their master scattered still in pieces. Pity the mortals who know not about the dragons, descendants of the same blood, but will die in ashes. My face went pale as the beasts roared, and I could hear the serpents shifting in darkness. The moon shed down a blood-red light, as the mouthless prophet spoke once more. I have seen the dragon in the great brass cage, he said. Its teeth are sharp, and its eyes are opening. Its crown shines, and its throne to be remade. And when the cage shatters, it will breathe. In the shape of the dragon. Unknown, circa 1900 CE. I have long been suspicious of the dark secrets in this false city, but it is only when I am here that I came to know how terrible the secrets might be. I have only a wild guess of what unspeakable god the hanged king bargained with, and I do not dare to think about the rotten things hidden in the opposite side. I have to write down my horrible discovery, but as the city rules stand, I am compelled to compose a poem instead of a journal. It is a carnival, after all. I have arrived at the great city of Alaggada, the place of treasure and the court of revelry. But as I peek down deep beneath, the rubies crafted of blood and the gold made of meat, I have walked down the black corridors, away from the cheers and feasts. As the singing faded and the black stars shined, I smelled in the darkness the rotten things. I stepped on the pathways, and they felt like organs. I looked up to see the pillars resembling ribs. I turned and ran until I met a blood river, and each step I made sounded like a scream. I have traced to find a deep black hole, all the blood flooded, roaring underneath. I heard crows laugh, vague and distant. From the star-like holes the heavens bore. I have seen the crowd approach once more, with broken masks and decaying bodies. The food they carried sprout rats and maggots. The wine in their glasses, a dark red liquid. I have dived down into the great fall of madness. I have heard the laughter come from the ambassador. I recall meeting with the hanged king, all chained and bandaged, with painful moaning. I have landed in a tunnel as the waves washed me. Decay and mold crawled upon my body. I have crawled deep down to the center and saw the mark of the dragon. I have looked around the chamber, but it was void and empty. The blood dried and the waves ceased. The structure around, still and lifeless. I have arrived at the bowels of the city, resting in its long, dead, rotting body. I have smelled death upon approaching, only to find it was something even more empty. It was the shape of a great dragon, who once resided here for ages and ages. But now, a mere hole, dark and gaping. The phantom of a god ripping reality. I have seen the whole of the great dragon, in the dark center of Alaggada. My mind shattered before the truth as I screamed and screamed. All the blood for the hanged king, but he was a mere tunnel for the greater things. The blood and flesh flowed into the great brass cage, a prison where the dragon, patiently waiting. To the Dragon's Witness, Zikhan, 1900 to 1800 BCE, South China. In the great abyss the two dragons resided, their forms grand and their glory uncanny. Eons after Pengu separated earth from heaven, the dragons rose from yin and yang. One is of flesh and matter concentrated, the other of wind and pure spirit. One called Niwa, our mother, the other one Fuxi, who guided us wisely. To the great fields the two dragons went, storms and thunders raging in between. They had seen fish in the seas and birds in the heavens, while great beasts strolled the wilderness, grand as high mountains and long as valleys. No one was there to witness, delicate as early flowers in shallow streams. No one was there to see. It was then Niwa sighed, that mankind was created. From the ancient soil she shaped our bodies, into husks great life she breathed. Niwa bestowed us forms and senses, built us into great serpents as she is. Fuxi gave us souls and minds, taught us wisdom and knowledge. Above the great cities the two dragons lingered. High towers and gigantic machines lined beneath. Their proud descendants now ruled the land. Serpents as they were, shaping mountains and seas. Fish caught in the nets, birds now in cages. The great beasts there no longer. As wilderness vanished, storms and thunders paled by their inventions. Fires and waters obeyed man's wishes. In the great skies the two dragons fought, their teeth sharp and their claws clutching. Niwa demanded that we be beasts once more. Fuxi wanted us to learn and become greater beings. Heavens collapsed with yin and yang disturbed. Grounds shattered as fire and water rampaged. Metal bones impaling the body of another, as the two dragons roared and wept. Down the great abyss the two dragons battled, one asked to destroy, and one preserving. As Niwa's rage could not be appeased, Fuxi shattered himself to be a cage, trapping her in Tasusing. If what I just read today is to be believed, a version of humanity was created by the gods from the abyss. Now, this isn't the only gods, but they're pretty big players, okay? Both started fighting each other. Mechane was basically like, if I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. So he literally used his body as a cage to trap Yaldabaoth. That's why we get the great brass cage. Basically, when he did this, it literally caused both of them to be ripped from the reality that we all know and love and go back into the abyss. Now, because he's broken, he's there, but not there. He exists, but doesn't exist. Not all of him is there, but there's enough of him there that it's keeping Yaldabaoth trapped so that she can't do anything. Well, that was until we have our lovely Hanged King. Now, what ended up happening? Well, from what I can gather, the king made a deal, like I said, with Yaldabaoth, maybe to get her out in exchange for a city that he wanted to rule. He wanted to become super duper uber powerful. So, I'll give you my city in exchange for power, and not only that, I'll help you out. I'll help get you out of there. Okay. Well, if any of you guys have listened to some of the stuff that I have read about 049, you will probably understand what happened. Unfortunately, due to the fact that he was drawn and quartered, so he died within the process of doing the ritual. When he did the whole entire, mask thing and he was praying, maybe what ended up happening was he got everybody ready for a possible, usurpment, but he wanted to make sure that this was something that he wanted to do with Yaldabaoth. And when he was getting drawn in court, he was like, well, I literally have nothing else to lose. Hail Mary, let's finish this part of the ritual. And she basically said, I'll bring you back to life in 3 days if you can do all of this stuff. Or maybe he did it even beforehand, but regardless, he ended up summoning Yaldabaoth halfway through himself being drawn and quartered. And what ended up happening is he had also, like I said, made a deal with death. So, technically speaking, Yaldabaoth now owns this city, but death is watching and waiting in the wings because they're like, oh my god, you see this guy? It's so stupid. But anyways, what ends up happening is he screws up the ritual because he was drawn and quartered. He was supposed to drink the blood from the city. Everybody died, everybody committed, either they lost their minds, they killed themselves, or they got, weird stuff just happened. And there was a river that flowed through the city. The jester, his loyal companion, who, by the way, is 035, ends up going over, he ends up giving the king the cup, and the king drinks some of it, I think, but it drops. And because he does that, he had bargained his city. So what ends up happening is it works halfway. Because Mecane is technically there, but technically not, and because the guy fucked up the ritual badly enough, and he bargained everything, well, he becomes what they say in these writings, a conduit for something more greater. And as a result of him bargaining the city and him gets ripped and torn from reality, and not brought straight to the abyss, but somewhere in between. And when he does this, and when it becomes the in-between, his face literally becomes this God-shaped hole, where the nothingness, the absence of this broken God is, the whatever you want to call it, the not there but sort of there, the tear in reality of him not existing, of Mecane, is embedded in his face. And beyond that, that's where Yaldabaoth is. So Yaldabaoth is hiding within the Hanged King, which, by the way, this makes me feel so bad for that poor Foundation soldier. So for those of you who don't know, later on within the writings, the Foundation ends up hearing about this really weird creature called the Ambassador of Alaggada, which personally, one of my theories with the Ambassador is he's literally an Archerion, which is basically it's an entity that does the bidding of Yaldabaoth, and he's not a nice guy. He's pretty bad. He ends up literally making the whole entire team that wanted to say hello to him from the Foundation kill each other, and only left one there to basically say, this is what happened. And the one that did survive literally saw what the Hanged King's face looks like. So he literally saw something that broke him. And if he looked even further than just the absence of a god, he then also could have possibly seen chaos literally incarnate. So this poor guy, he went through a lot. But that's personally where I believe that the old god Yaldabaoth resides. Now that I basically spoiled maybe some stuff for you, or maybe just got you really super into all of this, let's get back into the document that the Foundation people have written for us. So, according to the Foundation, blind and driven solely by instinct, Yaldabaoth is depicted as accompanied by, like I've said earlier, entities known as Archerions or Voltus, according to certain proto-Sarkic cults. These beings are described by Sarkic texts as being faceless manifestations of the primordial chaos, their true forms inconceivable to the human mind. Gnostic and Mechanite scripture would mention the Archerions as well, describing them as quote-unquote terrible, raptious angels. What did I just read earlier? Something about there being a huge war and horrible angels being there, so kind of cute. Okay, so we have a lovely thing that the Ion wrote, so we're gonna quick read that right now, and that is: the swineherd prostrated himself before the sorcerer king and asked, "Great sorcerer and Ozimok, heart of man and light of lights, I speak for the folk of the Cold Marsh. We fear the red lanterns that dance without harmony. Our spirit guides warn of ill omens." And Ion did assure the man, "I have gazed upon the faceless ones, surveyors of his undulating vastness. Their chief is blind, castrated by our words and will. He sings songs of anarchy, but they will not come again. These terrible spirits do not deserve our love. Render unto them no sacrifice until the stars have aligned." Son Vith. The 6 ordeals of Ion refers to 6 challenges issued to Ion by the Archerions. Through enduring their trials, Ion is said to have mastered the rituals and practices ambiguous to Sarkicism, breaking free from the quote-unquote bondage of mortal limitations. Further information about Ion's relationship with the Yaldabaoth and his Archerions, as well as the nature of the ordeals, remains unknown. By the way, this is a lovely drawing of an Archerion. Rather spooky and Cthulhian, don't you think? Some Sarkic cults hold that the Archerions, along with Yaldabaoth, do not originate from our universe, let alone the multiverse. Like I said, the abyss. These cults believe that these entities begin in the void, the abyss, and their colossal physical forms are vessels for profane spirits. Because their consciousness is tethered to the void, they know only hunger and will consume all things in their desire to feel whole, spreading like a cancer across the multiverse. The Archerions are frequently referenced as having some relationship to the stars and the growing darkness that exists between them, but little else is known about this connection. Sarkic art and iconography depicts typically Archerions as red or black and vaguely cephalopodic, like I said, like Cthulhu. What makes this interesting is most Sarkites traditionally live inland and are likely unable to encounter cephalopods in the first place. Anyways, fun facts about the void. It is also known as Vilnajan, a Daevite word loan meaning without light. It is an ineffable, primordial manifestation of nothingness located outside the physical cosmos. To end off this mythology section, finally, once and for all, I shall read another zone. Then we will dive deeper into the lore that we have spoken about earlier. In his flock, Ion thus spoke. I have stepped beyond the flow of dreams, stood before the old ones within their own desolate domain. I have endured their intolerable force across countless eons. I have seen the infinite dead worlds, murdered death herself. I have read the entrails of our Creator, beheld eternity unfurled, know that our paradise draws near, and that with our own flesh we shall birth it. SunnyClockworks. Most information regarding Sarkic history and mythology has been sourced to the Bofidel Codex, recovered from SCP-24 AD. We were talking about this Addendum's Wake. The Codex involves a partial translation of the Valkyzaron and related marginalia. Along with archaeological evidence, the Foundation has been able to establish the general history of Sarkism. A little fun fact that they have right here is Sarkic weapons, armor, and trinkets have been discovered along Minoan ruins in the island of Santi Terinae. Here's a picture of where it would be IRL. It is formerly known as Thea, by the way, possibly placing their origins to at least before the eruption event which triggered the complete collapse of the Minoan civilization around 1500 BCE. I don't know any about that type of stuff. You probably don't. We're not going to look into it. Not enough items to suggest an invasion and or occupation. More likely, the items arrived via Minoan merchants and Central Asian trade routes. It is presently believed that Sarkism itself did not reach the Mediterranean until approximately 12 BCE, theoretically related to the Bronze Age collapse. Daevite tablets dated to approximately 1800 BCE refer to the slave rebellion in the northernmost province led by a charismatic hierarch and half-blood. Scrolls discovered within phrases and terms of archaeological cults basically say in the scrolls references to Grand Karsus Ion. Basically, from what we can gather with these lovely tablets, supposedly Ion might have started his slave rebellion, i.e. starting his empire and the whole entire giant vanillan arc within 1800 BCE. This basically tells everybody that Sarkism most likely has existed for at least nearly 4,000 years. All evidence, linguistically and archaeologically, points to Western Siberia as Sarkism's origin place. Oh, who knew that we had a whole bunch of weird proto-Sarkic cults where everybody might be normally when everything first started off. Anyways, Ion, if still alive, likely represents a high-level reality bender. Little is known about the Grand Karsus, sorcerer of Adytum, with all information being in the form of a deification or demonization and lacking a factual reliability. Basically, either the people back then loved him to the point that they believed he was a god, or they loathed him. A little tangent, the Valkyzaron refers to Ion as having been born to a Daevite mother and sired by a concubinous father, implying that males born of such unions were destined for slavery. The exact nature of Ion's bondage is unknown, but his supposed intellect suggests that he was not used for combat or manual labor. Oh, he was too cool for that. Perhaps serving under an alchemist or priestess. Artistic depictions of Ion vary, ranging from masculine to androgynous, from young to old, from human to forms otherworldly. He is most often characterized as wearing red, white, and black robes, and bearing his iconic staff, whilst in the nude variants usually depict his body as being impaled by various spears, stakes, or carrying his own decapitated head, signifying his immunity to death. Associated symbols include spirals, shattered chains, drops of blood, sickles, and last but not least, the Ouroboros. Oh. Here is Ion's symbol, by the way. If you'd like to know, we're going to be having the symbols of each one of the Kevlar along with their stuff later. It remains unknown which came first, Ion's doctrine or his revolution. If these events are to be grounded in reality, that the religion developed in coincidence with his slave revolt as a way to codify their methods of anomalous warfare. In his mission, Ion was aided by 4 individuals known as the Klavgar, I think is actually it is, I'm sorry. 4 figures of reference are the supposed disciples of Ion. I call them apostles. They're also considered the saints of Sarkism. Clavgar Nadix, Clavgar Loftar, Clavgar Orik, and Clavgar Sarin. Now they have a basic understanding of Ion. Let's go into his little Clavgar group. So the first one is Clavgar Nadix. Here's his symbol, by the way. Okay, now that you know his symbol, we're going to be moving on to everything else. Associated with intelligence, wisdom, perception, and mysteries, epithets include the tongueless speaker, Lord of Mysteries, the all-seeing, and the anticipation of Ion. Once a sage in the southernmost region of the Daevite influence, he preached a philosophy of peace and equality, building a following amongst the impoverished. This agitated the Deva, and he was captured and publicly tortured. The poor he had tried to help, now hurling stones upon him, before a crowd of hundreds. Drunk and atrocious in their stupidity, a Deva priestess cut off his tongue, sewn his mouth shut, and had him emasculated. Basically, they took away his lucky charms and, his stick. It was very common Daevite practice by the female Daevite leaders. Anyways, rather than having Nadix executed, they instead had him marked, basically trying to make sure that he didn't become a martyr. A symbol placed upon the forehead, impossible to remove, it designated him as a quote-unquote sufferer, one who the people were required by Deva's decree to forever torment but never kill. Nadix wandered the land as a pariah, denied refuge and safe passage, struck with rocks and slashed with knives, all by the people he hoped to save. It is written that he beheld while suffering a fever dream, a messianic entity, one that could rescue him and humanity from an existence of suffering and tears. Nadix would travel north in search of this savior to guide Ion towards his destiny. Nadix is typically depicted in red and gold attire, his head, sometimes hands, completely bandaged or caged by a punitive mask, representing his staff as a quote-unquote sufferer, and bearing multiple arms with eyes. In the palms of his hands, his symbol includes eyes, hands, scrolls, teardrops, and the lotus flower. There's a lovely song that is written about him, so we're going to be reading it right now. And Ion held his 6 fingers aloft, and upon their spear did the soldiers impale themselves. For you! They cried before the blood drowned their tongues. And Ion said, Now do you see? And Nadix wept, as more did skewer themselves in Ion's name, for he had seen it now, the truth in his words. Son Sutras. Kevgar Loftar. Now, this is the one in particular that I mentioned that was going to get a little more spicy, I think, basically by me doing the whole entire Hand King tangent. We got a little bit more than we bargained for, necessarily. Somebody assuming that the people who didn't want to be here aren't, but just, tiny baby warning. Let's get into it. Here is her lovely picture. And now, let's read her thing. Associated with sex, love, eroticism, pleasure, motherhood, disease, and unrestrained reproduction, basically breeding, cancers, growth, etc., epithets include the one whom Ion most desired, the high blood redeemer, and the mother, and on rare occasions, brood or hive mother. A priestess, as well as the daughter of a Deva matriarch, she was initially in opposition to Ion, whose revolution threatened her way of life. It is written that her hatred for Ion eventually became a sort of infatuation. Unable to remove him from her mind, she sought to capture and bind him as her consort. Basically, in her own twisted way, she fell in love with him. In her quest to make him hers, Loftar sent wave after wave of slave hunters, but none returned. In time, it would be Ion who came to her by his own accord. It is written that Ion visited her in night, bypassing her guards, and appearing within her bedchamber. Instead of attacking, he sat upon the edge of her bed and quietly spoke to her. What was said is unknown, and to be honest, it says in the footnote those words were only meant for her, so girl boss will never know. All these resulted in Loftar and Ion forming a quote-unquote union over a period of several days. You can only guess what's happening with those two. On the 12th day, the two left her palace behind, never to return. Loftar is typically depicted as beautiful, voluptuous, often in unrealistic extremes, and almost always in the nude, save for golden ornaments including headdress, necklaces, and bangles. She's often stylized as having claw-like fingers and toes, as well as a pair of horns, which may or may not be part of her headdress. Her symbols include an insect queen, traditionally a bee or ant, a punctured heart, a blooming rose, and a broken scepter. There's a little sewn right here for her, and it is, "Beneath the black moon, her devotion took the form of a stone knife, like those of the reindeer folk of Adytum, penetrated amber blood, colored by ancient sins, poured from the wound. Her tears like the warmth of rain of distant summers. Beneath the poison moon, the amber flowed no more, and the snow she painted red, indecipherable, for Ion, who drank the deep mead of ecstasy. And from Lovetar's dark lips flowed words. There's a pleasure in serving." Smiling, Ion fell to their knees, knowing the drunk joy of milk and sweet fermented honey. Sown tall. Kevlar Orok, finally! We made to the man basically of the hour besides Ion. A figure of reference and supposed disciple of Ion, associated with strength, war, violence, wilderness, hunting, and, seemingly in contradiction, loyalty and revolt. Epithets include the horned beast, the brute lord, and the pale hunter. Described as being of unnatural physical strength, Orok was the product of alchemical and thaumaturgical experimentation on slaves. Enthralled to matriarch Askovicha, the ruling Deva in the city of Gel, Orok served as a personal guard and pit fighter. Basically, in this lovely little footnote, it says he was a Gigachad who was the best fighter of all of his time. It is written that Ion, when taking the city of Gel, entered the palace of Matriarch Atskovicha, presumably the highest authority in the city. He requested that the matriarch should leave and take with her a message to the quote-unquote Deva of Devas, lest she suffer retribution. Refusing his ultimatum, the matriarch ordered Orok to destroy him. It is written that Orok hesitated, his quote-unquote runes of bondage setting his starved soul aflame so that his body became spirit. Turning to his matriarch, he struck Axkachova, his fist imbued with a very power she had forced upon him, and reduced her body to quote-unquote cinder and ash and heavenly starlight. Orok is typically depicted as a large, muscular, cyclopic man wearing a loincloth. His symbols include a two-headed axe, a one-eyed skull, a hunting spear, fractured bones, a closed fist, and a bull elephant. By the way, I almost forgot. Here's his symbol. We do have a quote from Orok. However, there's a couple of things that are mentioned within the footnotes regarding what his quote is. First of all, he mentions a city called Kytheria. Supposedly it has appeared in both the Sarkic and the Church of the Broken God scripture, and the Valkyzaron describes the conquest of Kytheria and the conversion of its people. The Maximilian Book of Horrors associates the location with the prophesied NK class end of the world scenario. Orok also mentions a symbolic organism implanted in the bodies of Sarkic cultists, including his, which is known as an akaloth. We'll further discuss that in the organisms section. So, here we go. And Oryx, as Oryx said to the Kytherians, power has made me from pain of the fragile. His weakness dies, here strength is born. I exert myself. A pale reflection of Ion's sacrifice of the flesh to the intolerable force that has shed frailty's husk. I commune with my Akaloth core. I shared metamorphosis complete. Zonzusk. And last but not least, Klavgar Soren. A figure of reverence and supposed disciple of Ion. Here is her symbol. She is associated with darkness, secrecy, deception, poison, assassination, and justice. A little fun fact of their version of justice is supposedly justice, or Jaka translates as divide, separate, or even cull. It is employed in Sarkicism as a concept of cosmic justice, separating the strong from the weak, the good from the evil, adherent from the apostate, terminating those deemed enemy or unnecessary. Basically, what the eggheads are getting at is this person did whatever she could to get what she wanted with justice. At least according to her, it would be justice. How and why is that the case? Well, you'll see. Yes. Epithets include the Whisperer, the Coiled Shadow, the Faceless One, and the Judgment of Ion. A house servant, she quietly endured Daevite abuse throughout her life. Having suffered long enough, she murdered the entire household with poison, garrote, and dagger. Captured, she would be imprisoned within the fortress city of Krust, the first to fall to Ion's conquests. Sarn was awaiting her execution when first approached by Ion, who moved through the dungeon walls like a quote-unquote mist of summer's snows melt, where he said, "The winds have shaped your actions. There is no evil in the judgment. You do not choose to be the vessel of our will. Many will die this day, but you are needed alive." End of quote-unquote. The prophet's hand is described as having been transformed into a quote-unquote wolfish maw, tearing apart the cell door with its teeth and liberating Sarn. Honing her skills, Sarn would eventually control a network of spies and assassins. A Daevite tablet describes their efficacy in graphic detail, so my lovelies, you have been warned. Including men and women disemboweled in the streets, and Daevite infants strangled in their cradles by quote-unquote traitorous servants. End of quote-unquote. Sarn is typically depicted as either a young girl dressed in rags, or an entirely black half-human, half-serpent being. Occasionally, both representations are shown with a chimeric entity acting as the girl's shadow. Her symbols include serpents, traditionally adders, a sacrificial dagger, a scale, and bound effigies. Now that we have a little understanding about Sarn, again, we're going to be reading something about her within a sound. The heart is silent before her dagger is seen, a moment immortalized in a single strike. The judgment unavoidable, inescapable, dismay, a death inconceivable to the arrogance of Deva. Triumph, a dagger in the darkness, with the blood of tyrants our children sleep well. Son Valku. There is little information about Sarkism between 1600 and 1200 BCE, despite that period being considered the quote-unquote golden age of Sarkic civilization. It is during this period that Daevite culture recedes. Who knew? A whole bunch of slaves that got all freaking upset with their captors and literally murdered people? Yeah, I think they would recede. It is hypothesized that Daevites sought to anomalously preserve themselves as more and more territory was lost to Sarkites, and I can and will confirm this. There is a lovely SCP right here. This SCP is basically a book that I think is like either every time someone reads it, I'll have a little thing that basically does a little description, but from what I know, either people read it and they like decide to add more blood to it. Somebody could be injured, I think, in another room, and all of a sudden all their blood will like drain from their body, and it'll anomalously be written within the book. So that's how they're trying to keep their culture from dying. What this book does basically is it takes blood and it literally rewrites history. So what ends up happening is the more blood that gets exposed to this book, the more the Daevites are making their way up to our day and age, which is kind of cool and kind of creepy. It is theorized that the reason for the lack of archaeological evidence for the existence of this golden age is due in part to many Sarkic structures being composed of living organic material. Like I said way at the beginning of this video, there's that one SCP that's basically been preserved, but it's been preserved because it was just like how the biological, ecological shiz helped all basically mummify that little SCP. But anyways, let's get to the war and fall of the quote-unquote deathless empire, the Sarkic Empire. So, a Sarkic civilization, having reached its zenith, began to spread into Caucasus, Anatolia, Balkans, and part of the Levant and Mesopotamia. Impressed or fearful of their anomalous capabilities, several tribal groups began to fight under the banner of Adytum and the Sarkic faith. These include Kaskins, Proto-Thracians, Lycians, Illyrians, and many others. This semi-mythical state would come to refer to itself as the Kalmata, or the Deathless. The Hittite king Suppiluliuma II tried in vain to defeat the invaders, contributing to the fall of another empire IRL called the Hittite Empire. The Kalmata Empire established a foothold in the Mediterranean, invading/colonizing the islands of Cyprus, Crete, and Euros, the SCP. It is uncertain as to who struck first, but a coalition of kingdoms was formed in response to the Sarkic threat, resulting in a war around 1200 BCE. Archaeological findings such as mass graves, weapons, terrain damage, and primary source documents, such as scrolls recovered from Euros and the Aral Sea, reveal the extreme and anomalous nature of the war. Foundation historians estimate a death toll ranging from 20 to 30 million, making it the fourth most devastating war in recorded history. There are 7 different groups of people who decided to go against the Kalmata Empire. The leaders were most likely the Mechanites, calling upon the Egyptians, Mycenaean Greeks, Mannonians, Canaanites, and Assyrians. Fun facts about the Mannonians is that several of their people defected and spied on peoples in the name of the Deathless Empire. Most details of the war are unknown to the Foundation. It is suspected that the deployment of the colossi, such as SCP-2406, as well as the heavy use of a substance resembling Greek fire, turned the tide of the war against the Sarkites, which, by the way, for those of you who don't know what Greek fire is, everybody should freaking know about Greek fire. If you don't know what freaking Greek fire is, go to freaking school, okay? You dumbass. Look it up. Supposedly, the weird thing, though, in the footnote here is Greek fire, if it was used within this huge war, it would have been used before the official time frame of when Greek fire was used for. But anyways, let's get back into this stuff. When the war was over, the Kalmata Empire was assumed destroyed, along with the Sarkic civilization. In reality, Sarkism would continue in secret, at both its homeland in the Urals and among the tribes that had fought under the banner of the empire, such as among the Thracians and the Dacians. The damage of the reason was great, and many civilizations did not recover, resulting in the collapse of various kingdoms. A crisis of refugees, the decline of art, literature, science, and technology, and the lingering diseases and famine from the Sarkic biological weapons. Supposedly, this all culminated into an event later known to historians as the Late Bronze Age collapse. The fall of the once seemingly invincible Deathless Empire would result in a Sarkic dysphoria, leading to the development of culturally distinct Sarkic cults throughout Eurasia, due to the lack of reliable information. The Foundation can only speculate about Sarkic activities between 1100 BCE and 1300 BCE. Rise of Neo-Sarkism. The majority of known Neo-Sarkic cults appear to descend from Carpathian noble families influenced by the Proto-Sarkic Salmonari, besides, of course, our lovely Black Hunter's Lodge. It is unknown whether Salmonari intentionally infiltrated Carpathian courts, or if they were instead sought out by nobles themselves, ignoring or dismissing, possibly embracing, the rumors of devil worship and witchcraft around the cult. Documents and artifacts retrieved from SCP-Blank suggest that some Salmonari served as quote-unquote court magicians, advising their lords and ladies on matters of alchemy, medicine, astrology, and the occult. In time, this would result in the development of quote-unquote Sarkic great houses, affluent families practicing their own interpretation of Sarkism, placing the individual above the collective and applying it to their own self-serving needs. This new strain of Sarkism would spread throughout Europe via marriage. Once these footholds were established, the great houses grew incestuous. Basically, now that we have completed a crash course in Sarkic history, let's move on to the summaries of particular cults the Foundation has found. We'll be starting on the Proto-Sarkites, and we'll be moving on to the Neo-Sarkites, and then after that we'll be moving on to the last part, which will be the organisms that can be found basically the hot closed. Practitioners of Proto-Sarkism do not operate in the open unless a location is significantly isolated. Such sects display acute technophobia and eschew modernity. Proto-Sarkic cults generally value humility and sacrifice. Basically, if you don't want to fuck around and find out, don't bring some technology, and don't be a selfish asshole. The Salmonari. The ancestors of the Salmonari, historically known as the Zigramites or Holtan, likely settled in the Carpathian Basin between 1200 to 600 BCE. It is presently hypothesized that the Sarkites assimilated the local Proto-Thracian people, eventually becoming the Drycians, a people recorded by ancient Greeks and Roman sources. A Sarkic stronghold, the Foundation has theorized, being the given location of the legendary Skulamance, a supposedly school of black magic in Romanian folklore. Since the classification of SCP-blank was discovered in the southern Carpathians, it is believed to have once been the heart of the Salmonari cult. It has been hypothesized that the Salmonari are related to or one in the same as the Dracian cult of Zalakmoxis, having culturally melded with the ancient Proto-Thracians. Documents discovered at SCP-blank and SCP-2191 suggest that the Salmonari remained highly influential, albeit secretive, until the 15th century, possibly destroyed by John Hoyniunda, a leading Hungarian military and political figure. Several boyars of the Walcha and Moldova, most notably the gut-legged clan of Hungarian nobles, are now believed to have been under the control of the Salmonari, an influence that would lead to the development of Neo-Sarkism and its western expansion. It remains debatable whether the modern practitioners would be considered true Salmonari following that this was discovered at SCP-blank. Most are located in isolated pockets throughout the Carpathians with little to no connection with one another. The religion, in its current state, is an amalgamation of local folk traditions and Salmonari blood rituals. The Church of the Red Harvest was discovered at SCP-2133 in 1936 by Gru Division P. The Foundation became aware of the sect shortly after gaining control of SCP-2133, following the dissolution of the USSR. SCP-2133 is an unnamed village located in the northern Ural Mountains, whose denizens are the only known members of the Church of the Red Harvest. The church practices a ritual regeneration, their recent dead harvested as newborns from the turnip fields found throughout 2133. Members refer to the regenerative process as a part of the quote-unquote Old Covenant, one that cannot be broken and is to last until the return of the quote-unquote Paradise, or Adytum. It is currently believed that the Church of the Red Harvest is directly controlled by a Karcist known as Karcist Alka, located in a subterranean dwelling beneath the nearby mountains, connected to the village by a series of tunnels accessible via the village church. The Volta were initially mistaken for Angori, a different religious group within India, due to several superficially similar rituals. Known to the Foundation since 1969, a Sarkic connection was only established in 2010 through extensive research. The Volta command fear and respect among the rural poor in the Indian states of... I don't know how the hell I'm going to read this, but we're going to go Rajasthan, Himachal Pradesh, Jammu and Kashmir, Haryana, Punjab, and Gujarat. They trace their origins to Karcist Vaski, who claim they arrived from the northwest, granting them his blessing and spreading his virulent plague to their enemies. But you know who you are, and I bet you're laughing at all these mispronunciations. Regardless, I hope you have an amazing rest of your day, bud. The Church of the Eternal Mother is a small sect found in SCP-4476 deep within the South Louisiana Bayou. It represents what is the oldest example of Sarkism being transplanted to the North American continent. Practiced exclusively by the members of the La Famille Netou, the rituals and practices of the church can trace their lineage as far back as the fall of Euros and Karsis Mekensa. First contacted by the Foundation in April 2010, the majority of their rituals and specific religious beliefs are relatively unknown, as further research into the Natu family has been suspended following several recent setbacks. Now we're going to be going into the Neo-Sarkites. Neo-Sarkites display an only superficial resemblance to historical and current proto-Sarkic sects, whereas proto-Sarkism is isolated and archaic, bound by superstition and taboo. Neo-Sarkism embraces modernity, whereas proto-Sarkism is fragmented, each group existing within a vacuum. Neo-Sarkism is cosmopolitan and unified. It remains unknown whether Neo-Sarkic cults represent a relatively recent development or a willing evolution of proto-Sarkic sects. Neo-Sarkism displays no qualms with technology and may be found in heavily populated locations, their daily lives differing little from the others of their culture and social status. For Neo-Sarkic cults, the proper moral purpose of one's life is to the pursuit of one's own desires and attainment of power. While some Neo-Sarkites prefer to cling to their crumbling manners, relying on lands and titles, others have embraced modernity through capitalism. Group of Interest 0490, otherwise known as Adytum's Wake. Active throughout the northeastern United States, Adytum's Wake is thought to be the oldest Sarkic organization in North America, with evidence of their existence dating as far back as 1650. The organization has been presumably destroyed on November 28th, 1952, but not before the creation of SCP-2480. Considered by the founders of the project Sutra Ultra to represent the quote-unquote first shots of what would become a complex and invisible conflict. Cornelius P. Bovedel III, otherwise known as Carsus Solksy, a millionaire industrialist with a acute interest in the occult, was the acting leader of Adytum's Wake until his death in 1952. Dismissed by the Foundation in 1932 as another decadent social club, their anomalous capabilities were not recognized until November 28th, 1952 instant. The Foundation fears that Adytum's Wake survived its initial defeat. It has theorized that the renewed cult is presently under the control of Vivian Durkant-Coy, president and CEO of the Duran-Bofidel Financial Group, wife of Hungarian national Alexander Croy, CEO of Abraxt Arms, and a suspected Sarkite. Group of Interest 0432, otherwise known as, guys, is the Hunter's Black Lodge! GOI 0432 is an anomalous criminal cult primarily active in the post-Soviet states, known as, like I said, Hunter's Black Lodge, or simply the Black Lodge. The group of interest has been linked to extortion, murder, robbery, gambling, prostitution, human trafficking, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, and underground fighting rings. While these activities are not inherently anomalous, the anomalous capabilities of the group of interest of 0432 has had an aberrant effect on their practice. The Foundation became first aware of the Black Lodge in the early 1990s after receiving a tip from informants in Interpol. Further investigation uncovered Group of Interest 0432 related documents of the recently discovered GRU Division P. Later corroborated by former members, it appeared that GRU Division P was unable to fully contain or neutralize the threat presented by the Black Lodge. One source describing them as quote-unquote a hydra. The organization was thought neutralized on several occasions for it to only reappear months later, quote-unquote, stronger than before. Victims of the Black Lodge have been discovered impaled by large organic spines, the decadents commonly showing evidence of ritual cannibalism. By the way, if you want to know something weird about the spines, they're made up of human DNA. To see all documents tagged with the Hunter's Black Lodge, I'll basically leaving a thing in the description below for you. Anyways, Group of Interest 0358, otherwise known as the Esoteric Order of the Worm. Active primarily throughout Europe, the Esoteric Order of the White Worm, otherwise known as, I don't know how the hell I'm going to read this, but Ferrier Freg Esotricus Rend, is a Sarkic cult disguised as a cult-themed fraternal organization, both open to men and women. Similar to other secret societies, the existence of the cult is an open secret, while its true nature is unknown to the general population. However, there are a couple of crazy theorists that do stumble on it from time to time. Based on documents recovered from SCP-Blank archives, the Esoteric Order may be one of the earliest Neo-Sarkic sects. Founded by Hungarian nobles, heavily influenced by their Salmonare quote-unquote court magicians, the religion transformed from a hidden pagan faith into a secret tool of the landed gentry. Descendants of House Vuros, a Hungarian noble family, are thought to dominate the leadership positions of the esoteric order. Last but not least, GOI 504D, the Dark Water Lodge. Another more recent discovery has been the existence of the Dark Water Lodge, located within the nexus of La Rue Macabre outside of New Orleans, LA. The Dark Water Lodge remains mostly unobserved. Negotiations to gain researcher access to the lodge via the La Rue Macabre leadership is ongoing. What is known about them is that they represent one of the fewer known examples of Adytite dysphoria south to the greater part of northwestern Africa. It was transplanted to the North American continent sometime during the mid-16th century. The lodge brought with them a practice that intermingled exclusively with the Alcan peoples of Ghana. Last thing I would like to mention is the Church of the Eternal Mother brought me to the La Rue Macabre hub, so in essence, I have a feeling both the Church of the Eternal Mother and the Dark Water Lodge have some sort of connections to one another. And finally, my lovelies, we have made it to the last section within the Sarkic hub. It has been a long time coming, but we are here. Like I have mentioned before, these guys love to shepherd the flesh, and while they have a lot of power and they can literally, if they are strong enough to have the imagination be the limit, the Foundation has found certain, I guess you could say, patterns within some of the creatures that they make. So this is a lovely list of some of the creatures that people have found over multiple locations within just everything. SK Biotype 001, colloquially referred to as behemoths by personnel. These entities are commonly over 4 meters tall or 12 feet tall, weighing approximately 700 kilograms, with pale, flabby skin, lacking visible eyes, ears, and noses. Their faces are dominated by a large, toothy mouth, and the first recorded instances of an SK Biotype 001 was SCP-2480. For those of you who don't know, basically what ended up happening was nobody knew what was going on, and all of a sudden a guy just got smashed to mush! So that was their first ever experience. They do seem to have a limited intelligence, and from what I could gather from little gleamings of information, they may walk on twos, but when they're going to charge you, they rush you with all fours. The ones that specifically were from SCP-2480-2, they basically had 3 fingers. Kind of cool. Anyways, let's move on to SK Biotype 002, which is generally 1.5 to 2 meters tall and approximately weighing 250 kilograms. You may think that's not much, you Americans, but guess what? It's like frickin' 500 pounds. They're also kind of heavy. Mouths are vertical, running along the lengths of what approximates a face, spindly fingers, and in 50 to 60 centimeter talons, which is like over a foot long. Bodies are partially protected by white chitinous carapace, the flesh beneath dark red and visible at movable joints. SK Biotype 003, also classified as SCP-2191-1, SK Biotype 003 are considered genetically human but have undergone several significant, seemingly fatal mutations. SK Biotype 003 lack all major internal organs with the exception of lungs, heart, and brainstem. Outer epidermis lacks pigmentation and displays a condition resembling cracked porcelain, probably related to something called Harlequin-type ichthyosis. Entities appear androgynous, lacking or having all somehow removed secondary sex characteristics. The regressed eyes are covered by a layer of skin, rendering them mostly blind, but are still able to react to light, universally displaying aversion to wavelengths greater than 100 nanometers. Further deviations from baseline Homo sapiens include especially flat upturned noses and funnel-shaped ears. Both considered related to their dependency on olfactory and auditory perception. They do not appear to communicate via language, the only sound produced being a persistent clicking of the tongue. speculated to be a form of echolocation. Some other fun facts that I would like to say about this. SK biotype 003 is one of 3 organisms in one singular being. So we have the outer being, which is the weird one with the cracked skin and all that good shiz, no organs, but they actually have a weird funnel-shaped tongue that comes out and sucks people dry. And then there's also like the reason why they don't have any internal organs besides, you know, the basics is because they have these little tiny like worms, microscopic worms that are in the organ cavity, which basically what these things are is a SCP version of a vampire. So kinda cute. SK biotype 004, colloquially referred to as snatchers by personnel. Prehensile organic structures, dark red in color, with tentacloidal shape. SK biotype 004 are sedentary and are generally used by Sarkites to guard specific locations. Now, one of the most terrifying things that I ended up finding out about this type, the snatchers, is the whole entire concept of it is you'll just be walking, you know, in the middle of some place, and then all of a sudden a giant muscly like tentacle will punch out from the ground. It's got scary spooky teeth on the suction cup things, and what ends up happening is it grabs you and then it brings you back down from the hole that they just created. Here's the thing about that hole is not the same girth as your body, so basically what ends up happening is the hole's too small, bud, and guess what? It makes you fit that hole, whether you want to or not. So, yeah, that's what makes biotype 004 absolutely terrifying. Let's move on to SK biotype 005. Known to Sarkites as Kirak, instances of SK biotype 005 are organic, biologically living structures used as temples. The Foundation presently has a deceased instance, SCP-2095, the one that we've been talking about this whole entire time. It is in containment, but other possibly living instances are theorized to exist around the world. Oh, wait, there's an update and says living instances have been recently encountered by field agents. Further information is pending. SK biotype 006, known to Sarkites as an Akoloth, and his quote-unquote sacred white worm. Instances of SK biotype 006 are symbiotic organisms found in the bodies of both Sarkites and Sarkic organisms. It is believed that they act as a secondary immune system, protecting the host against disease as well as greatly increasing their regenerative abilities. SK biotype 006 is also believed to be connected to the physical transformations some Sarkites undergo. And last, but definitely not least, my lovelies, SK biotype 007. SK biotype 007 may exist or be compromised of multiple species, and generally refers to any SK biotype that lacks a stable physical form, although this can occur in many, if not all, Sarkic organisms if critically injured. Existing as gelatinous mass, such organisms are able to increase their size with no known limit by absorbing the biomass of those it encounters. An individual can be converted into SK biotype 007 by a ritual, as encountered when SCP-2075 caused the transfiguration and subsequent death of Dr. Albert Cronenberg. So, in conclusion, Sarkicism, or Nalka, is an extremely ancient religion, which creates some rather terrifying creatures, cities, and, at one time, an entire ancient civilization. There are 2 different types, one being Proto-Sarkic and Neo-Sarkic, but if you ever meet one or the other, do not consider them the same religion, because one has crazy morals, but at least has something. Where is Ion and is Kevlar? Well, the Foundation doesn't know. Hell, they don't even know if they're real. So, where is Ion or is Kevlar? Well, you probably have locations that you'll be able to discover in time, but the Foundation doesn't know. Well, they don't even know if they exist. Maybe in some dimension, Ion did come, and his people, ever waiting, got their paradise they so desperately wanted. However, the Foundation does know the monsters and cults associated with them are very much real. Knowledge is power, and whatever knowledge they hopefully have within these papers prepares them for whatever horrors lie in store. As a passive observer in their realm, I can confirm there is far more to these documents than meets the eye. And if you would like to delve into the dark depths, I can bring you to them.
Welcome to reality, there's no way back. 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 Welcome to unrealization. We came prepared to kill the operation. It ain't fair, but I feel it with the nation. To raise the flag and do the preparation. Welcome to reality, there's no way back. Welcome to reality. With that. On top like forever, man. This is hard beeping after aliens. We on top of the world, we the sapiens. Do you understand massive complication there? Do you really think you know what I'm made of? My flow is so magical, I'm old, call me Gandalf. You can shine, but I'm about to go off. Heard me wanna believe what I'm saying, but I cannot do this at all. Welcome to reality, there's no way back. 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 Welcome to reality, there's no way back.